On August 5th, the national regime in Bangladesh collapsed and the dictator fled the country. Down in the rural village of Pratapnagar, the news triggered instant celebration. A group of about 25 to 30 young men poured into the streets, forming a spontaneous, joyful procession to spread the word. But the news hadn't reached everyone. Sheikh Zakir was the local chairman for the Awami League, the reigning political party. Sealed inside his compound, Zakir was completely isolated. He had no idea that his political protection had evaporated just hours prior. He was still operating as if his party's hierarchy existed to shield him. But outside his gate, the very people he used to rule over were now the only ones holding power. The celebratory procession wound its way through the village and eventually arrived right outside Zakir's house. They were chanting anti-regime slogans. To Zakir, who was used to unquestioned authority, the noise was an intolerable insult. Without trying to find out what the crowd was actually celebrating, Zakir stepped out and fired his weapon directly into the unarmed group. 3 men dropped dead on the spot. One of them was a highly respected young religious scholar named Hafez Anas Bilal. A Hafez is a title given to someone who has completely memorized the Quran. On any normal day, the state police might have intervened. But this was August 5th. The state apparatus had collapsed, the police had vanished, and there was absolutely no authority left to call. The villagers were thrust into a violent vacuum. With no state to protect them or enforce the law, they had to rely entirely on themselves to address this unprovoked slaughter. It was just past 1 p.m. when the news of the shooting reached the crowded central market. The villagers in Pratapnagar are known for being gentle, but the murder of a Hafez crossed a deep cultural line. As they put it, they could not understand how someone could fire a bullet into a heart that held the Quran. The reaction was immediate. People dropped whatever they were doing. 10 to 12,000 villagers grabbed what they could and began moving toward the compound. They abandoned homes and businesses, flooding out of the market perimeter and converging from every direction onto Zakir's location. Inside, Zakir and 20 accomplices were now barricaded. Outside, they were surrounded by an ocean of enraged citizens, marking the beginning of a massive 7-hour standoff. A single decision to fire on a celebration converted a quiet afternoon in the market into a full-scale siege. Inside the bunker, the situation was descending into chaos. When Zakir's wife begged him to stop shooting, he slapped her to the ground, ignored her pleas, and went right back to firing at the crowd. For hours, he rained bullets down on the villagers. Over 10 people suffered severe injuries during the siege. The damage was permanent. Some victims lost limbs or the physical strength they needed to work. As the afternoon dragged into evening, Zakir finally realized his local authority wasn't going to save him. Desperate, he picked up the phone and called the military for a rescue extraction. The military asked him a simple question: "Are you shooting anyone?" Zakir dismissively replied that 1 or 2 people might have fallen. The military's response was definitive: "Then you have no right to live." That refusal stripped Zakir of his last layer of political protection. For the thousands of people outside, the lack of state interference meant the outcome of the night was now entirely in their hands. The clock ran out at exactly 8 p.m. The mass of villagers breached the perimeter and set the compound on fire. Zakir and 5 of his accomplices were dragged out of the burning house. The crowd beat them to death right there in the street. But amidst this extreme violence, the villagers made a very specific distinction. They deliberately spared Zakir's wife and children, safely escorting them away from the compound. They didn't burn the house down with everyone inside. By sparing the family, the crowd proved they weren't operating in a state of blind bloodlust. This was a targeted execution of specific perpetrators, driven by a strict local moral code. The aftermath left the village with a stark contrast in how it honored the dead. Thousands of grieving villagers gathered to pray at the massive, peaceful funeral for the young Hafez, an event that mirrored the Shahidi March, or Martyrs' March, seen in student protests across the country. Meanwhile, the bodies of Zakir and his men were so badly mangled by the crowd that people couldn't even look at them. They were entirely denied their basic religious burial rites. What happened in Pratapnagar was a concentrated, microscopic version of the broader national uprising that swept through Bangladesh in July and August. When the illusion of institutional power shatters and the state evaporates, the people will inevitably step into the void, acting as an unstoppable force to reclaim their freedom and define their own justice.